Good morning. I'm glad to see such a great crowd for a introduction of a bill and a piece of policy that we think is very important. And I'm thankful for my colleagues for joining me, Michelle Bachmann on my left and Louis Gohmert on my right. And, of course, I'm Steve King from Iowa. And today we'll be introducing a piece of legislation that has been working a long time in the coming called the Promises Act. And what it does is it guarantees that America will keep its promises. As I fumble around here for the acronym, you're probably going to want to know where that comes from. Our creative Capitol Hill comes up with some good names for bills. Promises stands for Payment Reliability for Our Obligations to Military and Investors to Secure Essential Stability. Now, you will know that we're faced with the debt ceiling debate. And it is an unknown at this point as to how it will emerge when in the contest of wills between those of us who want to ensure constitutional and fiscally responsible principles, which includes a constitutional amendment for a balanced budget and the repeal of Obamacare and a number of other items. But we've watched as a couple of things were used as leverage to get agreements here in this Congress. One of them was military pay. And the other one is the president's tactics, I believe just yesterday, when he was speaking of military pensions and veterans checks in particular and Social Security payments, when the president said, I cannot guarantee that those checks go out on August 3rd if we haven't resolved this issue, because they may simply not be the money in the coffers to do it. President Obama. Remember when he said, check your ultimatums at the door? And that sounds to me like at least a veiled threat, if not an ultimatum. But what we know is this, that there's money that comes in, there's revenue that comes in, and it's an annually around $2.5 trillion under the current flow. And of that, we want to make sure that we keep our promises. Now, if I look at the people in this Congress that have led on this issue, on the House side, in particular, Tom McClintock and his full faith and credit piece of legislation that ensures that we keep our credit and our bond rating by paying and servicing our debts first. That's been his principle. Louis Gohmert, whom we'll hear from in a little bit, has very much and powerfully led on the issue of making sure that our military are paid and that they're paid on time and that they're not used as a lever politically to move legislation. It's my belief that if we put these two issues together and we get them to the president's desk for a signature, and I can't imagine what his argument would be against paying our military and keeping our credit rating up. But if we do that and that turns into law, then it's easier for us to sit down and negotiate what we might do without the threat of no military pay, without the threat of watching our credit go down. And if we want to see the bond markets hold up, if we want to see our national credit hold up, then we need to pay and service our debts. So these are the two high promises. Our military is a constitutional obligation. Our servicing our debt is, I'll say, a constitutional recommendation, at least a power that's enumerated within the Constitution. And so what this bill does is it guarantees that we set a priority to pay our debts, our bills, in this order. We pay our military first because they're the ones that protect the security and liberty of the American people. And we can't defend our shores or our interests abroad if we're not going to pay our military. That's a guarantee. Their lives are on the line. And when you look them in the eye and you see that noble look and you know that they're worried about their families back home not having the resources to pay the rent check because there's politics being played in Washington, D.C., we owe them better. We need to guarantee to them for all time that we'll pay our military first and on time. Second is the interest in servicing the debt, the national debt. Those two things, that would consume around 15.2% of our revenue stream. There's still a lot of money left over for the president's discretion to play political games, but let's not do so with our military, and let's not let our the full faith and credit of the United States go to pot at the expense of political leveraging. So that's the initiative of this bill, and I'd be happy, and I'm very grateful that Michelle Bachmann has agreed to join on to this bill. And she's led on a lot of principles, and we're going to see many principles emerge as time moves forward. But I'd like to introduce Michelle Bachmann.
Thank you, Steve. I want to thank my colleague, Representative Steve King of Iowa, for his leadership on this important bill. We saw earlier this spring in April when the military pay became an issue when we were dealing with the budget resolution. Now we're coming to another turning point in our nation, and that's dealing with whether or not we will raise the debt ceiling. I think it's imperative, and I commend my colleague Steve King for combining these two important issues. During the course of our discussions in Congress, we have had a bill come forward by Representative Tom McClintock in California, and I was very pleased with the fact that Tom and also Senator Pat Toomey on the Senate side had come forward with the bill that would first make sure that we keep the full faith and credit of the United States. This is a misnomer that I believe that the President and the Treasury Secretary have been trying to pass off on the American people, and it's this, that if Congress fails to raise the debt ceiling by $2.5 trillion, that somehow the United States will go into default and we will lose the full faith and credit of the United States. That is simply not true. It's important to recognize that revenues to continue to come in to the United States Treasury. It's merely the President's obligation and the Congress's to make sure that the interest is paid on the debt. We're grateful that revenues are sufficient to be able to pay the interest on the debt. Let it be known, and let us have a legislative direction that we do pay off the interest on the debt first. That's what Steve King is doing in this legislation. Representative Louis Gohmert of Texas also had a very good idea in April. He said, under no circumstances should the brave men and women in uniform who are fighting to protect the liberties of this nation while the United States is engaged in various conflicts, should they have for a moment their military pay be somehow in abeyance or suspended. The families of the military deserve far better than that, and that's why it's imperative, again, that we stand both with our military and also with making sure that we stand to secure the full faith and credit of the United States. I commend Louis Gohmert, I commend Steve King, I commend Tom McClintock and Pat Toomey for trying to put this effort forward. We cannot go on scaring the American people. We need to be truthful, and I call on the President and the Treasury Secretary to tell the truth to the American people, and this is what Steve King's effort is trying to do.
Thanks. Thanks, Michelle. Well, I want to thank you for being here today, and I also particularly am grateful to Steve King and Michelle Bachmann. Pat Toomey and Tom McClintock did have the idea for the full faith and credit bill that would ensure that our debts are paid. Now, you would think that a responsible leader in this country would make sure that we encouraged bondholders, that we encouraged people who held our debt. You don't have to worry about anything. The only thing you guys have to fear is fear itself, because we're going to stand good for it. Instead, we've had a White House who goes out and has made basically the last 2.5 years about fear-mongering. That, gee, now it's seniors. You have to worry that you won't get your Social Security check. And we know from the House rules that the President never lies, but he is taking advice and information from somebody apparently who is willing to lie, because it's just not true. The fear-mongering needs to stop. I've heard many people in the House and Senate on both sides of the aisle say, including the President, we need to have adult conversations. Well, what you see and what Steve and Michelle have proposed and I've joined on to is a bill that is an adult approach to a problem. It does what the President should be doing, saying, those of you who are holding debt of the United States, you don't have to worry. You will get paid. So we don't panic the bond markets. We don't panic those who may be looking at buying debt in the future. And then not only that, our military members who are in harm's way, I'm sorry, they were used by both sides as pawns in the political game of the continuing resolution. And I do mean it. Both sides used it. They should never have been allowed to be pawns in a political game. Recently in Iraq, meeting with soldiers there, having accompanied the body of a helicopter pilot who crashed and was killed in Afghanistan, I'm telling you from the bottom of my heart, our service members and their families should not have to give it a second thought as to whether their paychecks come in on time. It shouldn't even be anywhere in their thought processes. And the way to do that is what Steve and Michelle have proposed. You combine these ideas. We're going to provide full faith and credit, so anyone holding our debt has nothing to worry about. Our military members who are dodging bullets for our benefit to secure this land and the liberty we love, never give it a thought whether you'll be paid. You are going to get your paycheck on time. You're not going to have to worry about your car being repossessed. Apparently, things in that one way have not changed a whole lot in the 30 years since I've been in the Army. A lot of people do live paycheck to paycheck in the Army, and they shouldn't have to worry about it. So I'm very grateful that this bill has been put together and forwarded by Steve and Michelle, and I join with them. And let me just say, with regard to any president, particularly the current one, who has never thought of saying something like the only thing we have to fear is fear itself, and instead is out there saying, we got another crisis. Seniors, you may not get your check. Veterans, you may not get your checks. I would encourage the president and those advising him, take a look at what you have. You've got $129 billion in TARP assets. You have land. You've got leases that Salazar returned the checks on when he first came into office. There are all kinds of assets, and as our friend Art Laffer had pointed out, the federal government has got into Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, into car manufacturing, and as Art says, you give me a long weekend and I can get us out of all of it, and we'll have billions of dollars to show for it. And so that's the kind of thing we need to do, and I look forward to whether it's this president or perhaps another one, even somebody here in this room, who will stand up and say, we're going to be okay, and here's the plan to get us there. And I think this bill is a good start toward doing that. Thank you all.
Thank you, Louis. I just wanted to point out something that I think we should be thinking about. There seems to be a mindset that the president has all of this authority and he can have the discretion to decide which gets paid and which doesn't. And I am concerned about that, and that's part of the motivation for the bill. But I would remind you that Article 1, Section 8 of the Constitution says, in summary part, Congress shall have the power to pay the debts and provide for the common defense of the United States. We can direct this, and yes, the president could veto it. He might have to make a long explanation as how to do that. Now, we're going to limit the questions to the subject matter of this bill this morning. I know that's a disappointment to some of you, but I'd be very happy to take questions or direct them to whichever of us you'd like. And I see Chad first.
Thank you. I guess my question is, you all suggested that there were issues that maybe the people advising the president weren't necessarily telling the truth, saying that this, we might not default on the 2nd of August. Do you think that the Speaker of the House, and I'd like all three of you to weigh in on this, is not telling the truth? He said twice on Monday that he believes that the United States has to increase the debt limit by August 2nd.
Well, I'm the one that said that he's getting dishonest advice, because the fact is, when it comes to... I'm talking about the president.
I asked about the Speaker.
Well, the Speaker's getting bad advice. I guess the problem with the Speaker and him saying that is he believed the president, and I will encourage the Speaker not to believe the president anymore when the president says things like that, because the fact is, if he'll do his homework, he'll find there is such a thing called the Social Security Trust Fund, and the Social Security Trust Fund will be able to pay seniors their checks for many months to come, even if Congress does nothing. So I would encourage our Speaker, quit believing the president when he makes these uses these scare tactics. There's money there regardless of what we do, and the seniors will be taken care of. That's why it's dishonest. And in fact, that money is not allowed, and we got this clarification from the Joint Economic Council, bipartisan group. But they said yesterday there's money there is for many months, and the only way seniors would not get paid is if the Treasury Secretary makes the decision that even though the money's there to pay them, he decides for whatever reason he might have, he doesn't want to pay them.
I agree with Mr. Goldman on this, and I would add to this that if you look at the revenue stream that we have, roughly $200 billion a month, and you go down through Medicare, $43 billion a month, Medicaid, $23 billion a month. Social Security, if you pay it out of this, out of current revenue stream, is $58 billion a month. And then defense is $58 billion a month also, but part of that's military pay. So if you look at these numbers, they come very close to and still fall within the revenue stream. Just if that's our priorities, we can pay the entitlements along the way with the current revenue stream. And I'm saying that there's scare tactics being used because there is a concern about the full faith and credit part of this. We want to solve that problem by passing this bill. It solves the problem. It gives John Boehner more leverage with the president in the White House. Michelle?
And my response would echo that of Steve King. What we want to do is take the politics out of this issue. We're in a very serious time right now in our country. We saw that with the jobs report that came out last Friday. 9.2% unemployment. This was a stunningly bad jobs report. We know that in 2006, that 64% of all jobs that were created in the private sector were created by businesses that had less than 50 employees. This year it was 48% of all private sector jobs were created by small businesses. Small businesses clearly are hurting. We know that even more because on Monday, the U.S. Chamber of Commerce issued their report that said 64%, almost two-thirds of small business executives said they won't be creating any jobs. Zero next year. And 12% of small business executives said they'll be cutting jobs. Add that up together. You've got 64% plus another 12%. That's 76% of small business executives will be creating zero jobs. That takes us to where we are right now with this raising the debt ceiling. What that means is we're giving the government authority to continue to borrow $2.5 trillion that we don't have. On Monday, I was in Indianola, Iowa, visiting a great company called Cementech. They had well over 200 employees. Now they've lost 50% of all their employees. Why? Because the economy is tanking. This is Washington. We're all in a bubble here. I'm spending my time in Iowa and South Carolina and New Hampshire and where the real world is. The real world is telling all of the politicians, get your act together. Stop being political. Stop playing with us. We're not pawns in your game. Pay off the debt. Pay off the interest on the debt. You can do that. You have enough money for that. Don't allow our military men and women to dangle over a fire and think they won't get paid. I'm unwilling to do that to any military personnel or their families. That's a dangerous game to play. Take it off the table. That's why I commend Steve King. That's why I commend Louis Gohmert, Tom McClintock, Pat Toomey. They're trying to pull the politics out, and they're trying to get serious. And that's why this is such a good piece of legislation.
Let me follow up on that. You're right with regard to our own leadership in the Republican Party. With the continuing resolution, there was fear tactics used in that. You had Republicans that voted for the continuing resolution because they were told, if you don't, our military doesn't get paid on time. You can't leave them dangling. When my bill had been pending all along, it could have been brought to the floor. It could have taken care of that issue, but instead they were used as leverage. And that's one of the reasons I'm so grateful that we're getting the help from Steve and Michelle to push this issue forward.
How many co-sponsors? How many co-sponsors?
We had about 190, 192, something like that on our bill, on the military pay bill. And Kay Bailey Hutchison, I think, has 80 senators co-sponsoring her companion bill in the Senate. So we're going to keep pushing.
It's a powerful position. Yes, sir.
Senator McConnell yesterday proposed giving the president unilateral authority to raise the debt limit if he submits proposals for deficit spending.
My answer was, and I'll pass it to the others who might expand a little further, I just think that's the fox in the hen house, and I'm really apprehensive about such a proposal. Anybody else want to comment on that?
Well, I'm no on raising the debt ceiling right now because I've been here long enough that I've seen a lot of smoke and mirrors in the time that I've been here. But I haven't been here long enough to forget who I serve or where I come from. And again, all I can reiterate is that people across America are saying the spending is what has to be addressed. It's too much. It's got to be limited. President Obama has yet to put forward a true spending plan. His goal was to first tax small businesses an additional $1 trillion. What did he say? Was it on Monday? Eat your peas, he said to small businesses. I've been on the shop floor of small businesses. I spent the day on a shop floor where it was 90 degrees in the factory for most of the day. And I want to tell you one story. I stood at the line when the guys that worked on that shop floor, where they'd lost 50% of their employees, they checked out as they were leaving. They had their lunch buckets in their hands. They were hot and sweaty after a long, hard day at work. And one guy came up to me and shook my hand and said, as President of the United States, I want you to give this country back to the people because it's not working for us right now. And he said, I'm not worried about myself. I'm set. It's my 6-year-old grandson, Isaac. That's who I'm worried about. I'm very worried about the country. So I'm here to tell you, it isn't a game. This is real. The pulse of the American people is they are very worried about America's future. And I think we need to pay heed because this country does belong to the American people. It doesn't belong to politicians in Washington, D.C. It belongs to them. That's why the common sense from Steve King and Louis Gohmert, Tom McClintock, and Pat Toomey needs to be praised.
Ma'am?
Congressman, you say that the military should get paid if there's no deal and we can't borrow money. Who shouldn't get paid? Because the money has to come from somewhere.
Well, we have to start somewhere. And that's why we need to make sure, number one, that we don't lose the full faith and credit of the United States. And number two, our military are fighting in harm's way. That's first and foremost. That must be done. But as Louis Gohmert said, we were all shocked and appalled that President Obama dangled out in front of the cameras that senior citizens may not get their checks. That's a very dangerous statement to make. We don't believe, excuse me, we don't believe that for a moment. As we said, there are sufficient funds in the Social Security Trust Fund right now to make sure that they get checks. And that's the responsible thing that we as members of Congress need to do. We need to get our act together here in Washington, D.C., so that we're serving the American people, not scaring them.
I think what's important to know here, though, is that we are setting a priority. We're saying we're protecting military pay, and we're protecting the full faith and credit of the United States. The President has said, by his comment about Social Security and military pensions, I'm not setting a priority on them. That's the important part of the news, I think, here.
Mr. King, all the rating agencies have said they're going to lower the debt rating. Is that okay with you guys? I mean, they said if you don't raise the debt ceiling, the credit rating is going to go down.
I would submit that if we don't get our spending under control, our credit rating is going to go down, and that's the Greece side of this. I put out a little tweet yesterday that was meant to be a little bit facetious, and I'm sure it was. I just see Molly laughing, but she read it. But I'm just sitting there thinking, what does this really mean here? So I sent out a tweet that said, I'll support a $4 trillion clean debt ceiling increase, only one string attached. We borrow all the money from Greece. I think that illustrates what we're faced with here. If we don't get our spending under control, we will be Greece, and there's nobody to bail us out. And so our credit rating that we have, we're trying to preserve it with this bill. We want to guarantee our credit rating stays, and I am concerned about it. That's part of the motivation to bring it here. But if we follow down the line that the President's leading, it's just a delayed reaction for our credit rating to go down. And this is a way that we can solve both problems, and it helps direct things in that direction.
None of us want to see the credit rating go down. None of us do. That's why we're so serious about this. Standard & Poor's not long ago, several months ago, came out and gave the United States a negative credit outlook going forward. That should have sent shockwaves here in Washington, D.C., and yet you notice there's an effort by the President to continue the level of spending. Because what the Wall Street Journal article said regarding the negative outlook when they were reporting on Standard & Poor's is that it appeared that Washington wasn't going to get serious about its fiscal situation. That is a question that we're addressing right now. Are we serious about addressing our fiscal problem if we continue to choose to borrow another $2.5 trillion and add to the debt? Because we all know that we'll fast forward and we'll be exactly where we are today, only in a more difficult position. Because rather than being $14.3 trillion in debt, we'll be moving up closer toward approaching $17 trillion in debt. That cannot be. So the problem isn't 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 25 years from now. The problem is today. And the American people are expecting us to deal with this overspending binge today.
Yeah, and I appreciate the question so much because it illustrates just exactly what Michelle has said, that the biggest concern for the longest period of time is that we don't get our debt under control. And that's what we're trying to do by taking a stand that the president can't keep spending 3.8 or 9 trillion when we only have 2.2 coming in. And this bill addresses the issue you've raised. We pass this bill, our creditors don't have to worry. They are going to get paid. And if you go back to 1812, the War of 1812, one of the things that set this country on a great course of international prominence was after the war with Great Britain, the War of 1812, people in the United States said, yeah, we've been at war, but we owe their bankers, we owe some people over there money, we're still going to pay it. They reassured the world that even though there'd been a war, they're still going to stand good for their debts. That's when people stood up and took notice and said, that's a country to watch, a country of integrity, and that's what we still need to be.
Thank you. I'm going to do one more question, and then we'll wrap this up, sir.
You mentioned, you joked about Greece. Are you truly worried that if August 2nd comes and goes, and there's no agreement, that the global markets will not violently react to what the Congress and the White House have refused to do? And on the second question, another global concern, and this is a very different issue, that Senator Rockefeller brought up last night, is the notion of phone hacking and what's happening a lot with News Corporation overseas and whether or not there's a violation of U.S. law. Do you have a reaction to that scandal as well that's growing overseas?
I'm just starting to watch that scandal on phone hacking evolve, and I don't know enough about it. I'm not ready to comment on that. But as far as what might happen, as you referenced a violent reaction in the global financial markets, no one knows. I know going into this subprime loan crisis, we had some smart people that have been in investment banking business for a long time, and I've continually challenged them coming into this in the fall of 2008 and afterwards. Play this out for me. Give me the blow-by-blow account, the scenario by which we would have a global financial crisis. How does this happen? In what sequence? Who does what? And what's their rationale? Play it out for me. I've yet to find anybody that can lay that all out in a convincing fashion. I mean, the answer that I get back after I press to that is no one knows, and no one has the nerve to find out because we'll do anything to avoid such a scenario. Well, I don't know, and I don't want to see that scenario, but I think the best thing we can do is make sure that we maintain the full faith and credit of the United States and be fiscally responsible so that we don't become a Greece. And by the way, if you remember what's going on in the EU, pressed, and they got now a credit extension a week or so ago, they pressed Greece to a period of austerity. They had to make real cuts. And if we would just look proportionally at what Greece has done, I think it'd bring us pretty close into better shape. But that really does wrap this up, and I just appreciate you all coming here and paying attention to this, and appreciate Michelle for her.
The only thing that I wanted to add to that is that is exactly the purpose of this bill, to make sure that we never lose the full faith and credit of the United States. That's why we are here today, because we are standing for the full faith and credit of the United States. President Obama is holding the full faith and credit of the United States hostage so that he can continue his spending spree. We're saying, President Obama, is your spending spree really that important to you that you would put at risk the full faith and credit of the United States? We're unwilling to do that. We want to make sure that first and foremost, we don't allow what the questioner said over here, to allow the ratings agency to downgrade American debt because we intend to pay the interest on the debt. We have the means to do so, nor do we intend to allow our military to go without their pay, which they deserve. So we say, let's stand there first. Let's at least agree, as Congressman King said. How could anyone disagree with these two items, that they simply must be paid? And that's what we're saying. We can negotiate the rest of the spending thereafter, but these two items must be taken off the table.
Thanks very much, everybody.